update to the housing element, which is done on an 8-year cycle. It was last done for the cycle starting in 2015 and ending 2023. We're currently working on the 2024 to 2032 version of that document. And we had a couple of workshops starting last summer and going into the fall. So I believe those actually predated the 2 new council members. But we will be having more workshops in the near future. And we'll be bringing that back to the council for its consideration and for input and comments. Next slide. So the general plan can also contain optional elements. Parleur's general plan does contain an air quality element and an economic development element. Kings County, for example, has a dairy element. So all that it discusses in that entire aspect of Kings County development is how dairies are processed and approved and the different criteria that apply to those. There can also be a design element that kind of breaks down how the urban framework works. Elements can also be combined. Sometimes we'll see something called an urban form element that really contains all of the provisions of land use, circulation, and open space, for example. And you can call the elements whatever you want to and combine them however the city feels, as long as they contain the minimum information that state law says they have to contain. Also, open space and conservation are sometimes combined in noise and safety. Next slide. The specific plan, Parleur does not have a specific plan, which is it's an authorized type of document. It's not required like the general plan is, but what it does, it functions similar to a general plan, but well, as you might guess, in a specific area of town. Historically, the industrial park was part of a specific plan, but when the city updated its general plan in 2010, the provisions of that specific plan were just absorbed into the general plan, and the specific plan went away. Say, for example, if the city was planning for some development on the south side of Manning, it might decide to come up with a specific plan that would lay forth very particular street patterns, zoning regulations, development standards, and that sort of thing that apply only to that part of town and not to the portions that are outside the plan area. Next slide. Now we get into the police power, which does not have anything to do with what the chief does. It is simply the city's the constitutional reserved authority to make and enforce in its limits all local police, sanitary, and other ordinances that do not conflict with general laws, specifically the laws of the state. So essentially, as long as something is allowed by or not prohibited by state law, the city can take all reasonable steps to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare by implementation of ordinances to protect those things. That can apply to public improvements, zoning requirements, the design of development projects, and many other issues. Next slide. So then we get into the zoning ordinance, which is, besides the general plan, kind of the bread and butter that regulates the things that I do for the city. And you'll see a lot of these things. The zoning ordinance, it says GC 65850. I put some of these references in here to indicate that if you were to look at California Government Code section 65850, that is where the California law discussion about zoning ordinances, it's called regulation by ordinance, where that comes into play and the procedures the city has to follow. So the zoning ordinance kind of the authority to have a zoning ordinance kind of elaborates on the police power clause. So by statute, the city can regulate how land and buildings are used, how dense development is, lot coverage, setbacks, all kinds of development standards, signage, open space requirements that go along with development, and essentially any other development standard. So in kind of a top to bottom format, zoning must be consistent with the general plan, and in the event that there is a specific plan, it must also be consistent with that. And I've only seen this in one other place, but the zoning ordinance is not necessarily codified within the overall municipal code. In Parleur it is, and in most other places it is. Fresno County, for example, has a standalone ordinance that is its zoning ordinance. So if you look up the Fresno County code, its zoning is not in there. Don't know why. Next slide. We brought a couple of maps to the council recently. The Subdivision Map Act is the statewide law that provides regulations for how we can allow the division of land for sale, lease, or financing. It includes a number of processes, including tentative and final maps, parcel maps, lot mergers, and the MAP Act also contains subdivision improvement requirements, along with the requirements for financial security so that the city can guarantee that public improvements get installed for private subdivisions. This is, the state law is supplemented by the city's subdivision ordinance, which is in Title 16 of the Municipal Code. Next. So the main types of maps are tentative, final, and parcel maps. Generally speaking, if somebody wants to subdivide a piece of property into 4 or fewer parcels, they use what's called a parcel map. There are exceptions to that rule that allow creation of more than 4 parcels. Generally, that has to do with very, very large parcels or has to do with land that is zoned for commercial or industrial development. Correspondingly, generally, if you want to create a subdivision of 5 or more parcels, it requires what are called a tentative and final map, sometimes referred to as a subdivision map or a tract map. Lot line adjustments are a simple procedure that can be used to move lines around. If somebody owns 2 parcels and they want one of them to be slightly larger than it is and the other one can be slightly smaller, the city can approve a lot line adjustment that allows that line to shift over. You started with 2 parcels, ended with 2 parcels. You're not creating or destroying anything, so the lot line adjustment is the appropriate mechanism. Under Parlier's code, the city council is in charge of approving most of these processes, although a few of them are delegated to the city manager, the city clerk, and the city engineer in some cases. For the most part, if a conveyance of land, including a subdivision of land, involves public agencies, it is not subject to these mapping procedures. Most public agencies, in most circumstances, can simply convey portions of property to a private or public entity just by recording a deed with a legal description. So, next slide. So here's a breakdown of different types of planning actions, categories, so to speak. There are legislative actions, which are activities that where the city council is making policy or regulation on a citywide basis or amending any of those things once they have enacted them. As it relates to planning, those generally include anything involving the general plan or a specific plan, anything involving zoning, whether it's on a map or a change to the text, and then annexation kind of falls in a mid area that's kind of quasi-legislative. The next category is quasi-judicial, which is easy for me to say, or administrative or adjudicatory, which are actions that take an existing policy or set of regulations and apply it to a specific situation in a discretionary manner. These include things like conditional use permits, variances, tentative maps, parcel maps, those sorts of things, where you're not making up new rules, you're just taking rules and applying them to a particular project. And then the third category would be ministerial actions. These apply a policy or regulation to a situation where you do not exercise any discretion and include things like building permits. Does it meet the code? Yes or no? A final map, is it consistent with the tentative map and have they put up security for it? Yes or no? And then accessory dwellings. Those things we're all just basically required to approve via, does it check these boxes? Yes, it's approved. No, it's not. And we do not get to exercise any discretion. Next slide. The conditional use permit is authorized vaguely by Government Code Section 65901. And what this is kind of a form of zoning relief. So it allows people to do certain uses that are listed within a zone district. And we would say that they're sort of compatible with the other uses, but they may be unique in that they require some kind of additional scrutiny while the city council is considering approving them. And that comes in the form of conditions of approval that are specific to the circumstances and not necessarily things that come straight out of a code or regulation. A lot of times, and I don't know how many times I've heard this, not just in Parlier, people request a conditional use permit to rezone property. The two things are not the same, they're not related. A conditional use permit does not change zoning. All it does is grant a a special privilege based on circumstances, based on findings and consideration of the council as to how this use could potentially affect other surrounding or nearby uses. And it does require findings, among other things, stating that the site is adequate physically for the type of development, and that the conditions of approval that the council chooses to apply to the project are necessary to minimize the impacts of that project on the surrounding or nearby facilities and properties. The variance, which is specifically discussed at that government code section, 65906, is another type of zoning relief which really allows the city council to look at what the zoning standards are applicable to a piece of property and kind of arbitrarily change them for very, very specific and limited reasons. It cannot be used to allow a use that isn't otherwise allowed. Say we don't allow fast food restaurant, I'm making this up, we don't allow fast food restaurants in a particular zone. You can't get a variance to allow that type of restaurant in that zone. That's not what variances are for. So these 4 findings that I've bulleted here kind of come straight out of the state law, and every city and county kind of modifies them a little bit, but they essentially state the same thing universally. So the property has some kind of unique circumstances that is not applicable to other properties with the same zone. The variance is necessary to preserve a property right that other people of property with the same zoning have and that would be denied to this person if the variance is not granted. That the variance will not materially impact other properties and that it's consistent with the general plan. In 2+ decades of doing this, I have recommended approval of 1 variance ever to a city council or planning commission. And it was in Parlier in a situation where a contract staff person had made a couple of mistakes on something that inadvertently allowed somebody to build a building where they should not have been allowed to build it. And so the city council was able to determine that there was a unique circumstance to that property that was not the fault of the owner, and so the variance was granted. In most other cases, those first 2 findings are very, very difficult to make if we're being honest about it. And so by and large, variances are, they're supposed to be difficult to make. A minor deviation is what this is called in Parlier's code. Other places call it a minor variance or a minor deviation. It all amounts to the same thing. This is supposed to be a simpler process that has a much lower threshold to make the necessary findings so that you can just look at something and say, okay, you know what? If we just give them a 10% or a 5% deviation to the required lot width, that's not going to cause a problem. Then the city manager can just approve that. In Parlier, the findings for minor variances are the same as the ones for the standard variance. So it's the only distinction is that these are just could be approved at staff level instead of by the city council. When we're going through our development code update, one of the changes we'll probably make is that we'll allow this to be done with a simpler set of findings. Because 10% deviations to things are not huge deals, whereas with the regular variance, you could be 25, 50, 70. I mean, it's a completely arbitrary deviation. So, next slide. Site plan review is kind of a generic term that just refers to going through and looking to see whether a proposed development listed as permitted in a zone district complies with all of the development standards required for that zone district. Most zones that are not just single family require site plan review prior to any structure being put up on the site. For the most part, it does only allow the city to apply existing standards to development of the site, not like a conditional use permit where you can examine more site-specific or context sensitive situations and apply different conditions on there. 2 other processes that are included in Parlier's zoning ordinance are classification of use and commission review and approval. Classification of use is kind of a very, very light version of a zoning text amendment where it allows the planning commission or the city council, in the case where there is no commission, to just determine that what somebody is proposing to do, while it's not specifically listed in the zoning, is close enough to other things that are listed that they can proceed with that use subject to the other development standards. And then commission review and approval is kind of an odd duck. It falls into, it applies to a very limited number of uses that kind of fall somewhere in between a site plan review and a full conditional use permit. And that commission review and approval will probably go away during the code update. Non-conforming uses, or what's commonly referred to as grandfathering. So the purpose of this is to accommodate uses that existed before adoption of a zoning regulation or a change to regulations, or applies to property that was developed, say, in Fresno County and then later annexed to the city of Parlier. What it essentially means is that those uses can continue to exist for some period of time and don't have to be changed or brought up to city specs or the new code or what have you. The key thing here is that the use or the structure that we're talking about has to have been legally put there in the first place. So if somebody illegally constructs something and then the zoning later changes and it's still unlawful, we don't consider that a non-conforming use. It's just an unlawful use. It was never legitimate to begin with. Even in the event that something was completely lawful and there's a change to regulations or an annexation, the city can't immediately tell people to stop that non-conforming use and bring it up to the code because there is some sort of expectation that they can recover some amount of the money that they put into it in the first place, and so they're allowed to continue it for some amount of time. So a lot of codes contain something called amortization, which I believe is discussed on the next slide. Yeah, so most of Parlier's zoning ordinance was adopted in 1968. There have been several amendments done to it since then, but by and large, it's still that original code. A lot of different uses were given 5 years to comply. Others were given 20, 30, or 40 years, depending on the type of construction. Part of the issue is that a lot of these things have not been amortized, is that the city is usually required to notify people at the time that their property, structure, use, what have you, becomes non-conforming. And that is kind of what starts that timeline ticking. And it's highly doubtful that in 1968 anybody was notified of anything. Anyway, very little has, that's not uncommon. That we see that everywhere. So, okay. All right, now we move on to the best subject, the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. CEQA, as we deal with it, is contained in two big chunks of law. One is the Public Resources Code, which is adopted by the legislature, signed by the governor, chaptered by the Secretary of State. That's the statutory law of CEQA. The part that we deal with on a more regular basis for implementation purposes is called the State CEQA Guidelines, which is contained in the California Code of Regulations, and we just usually refer to it as the guidelines. So when I say CEQA, by and large, I'm just referring to both of these together. So the purpose of this law is multifold. It's intended as a disclosure process to provide awareness to the public about projects and how they will operate and potential effects they might have, as well as to provide that same information to decision makers to help give them proper consideration when they're thinking about approving or denying projects. So every project in California must be reviewed for compliance. Whether it's a private project, public project, what have you, and more on that in a minute. So the city, or in any case, the agency that has the primary responsibility for approving or carrying out a project is called the lead agency. And that agency is responsible for conducting the CEQA analysis. There are other agencies that could take action after the lead agency. Those actions are still necessary to facilitate the project. Those are called responsible agencies. Using an example of, you're fine. Using an example, a recent subdivision that the city approved, well, it's actually in 2021, the Mendocino and South subdivision, the city of Parlier was the lead agency for that project. It was responsible for approving the map, the subdivision, the tentative map itself. It was responsible for initiating the annexation, and therefore it was primarily responsible. It would be approving the building permits and all that sort of thing. The Fresno Local Agency Formation Commission, which you lucked out, I did not include slides about in here, is a countywide agency that is responsible for approving annexations. They would be considered a responsible agency because they take a subsequent action to the lead agency's original approval. So LAFCO was required to consider the city's CEQA analysis when it undertakes its portion of the approval. Okay, so going back to this, a project is defined in CEQA as any activity undertaken directly by a public agency. Any amendment or enactment of general plans or zoning ordinances, although there's some recent case law that kind of restricts that a little. An activity undertaken by a private party funded by a public agency, or, as we deal with it mostly in the development world, an activity undertaken by a private party involving the issuance of a lease, permit, license, certificate, or other entitlement from a public agency. So that's anytime the city council is taking action on something that I'm bringing from an applicant, it falls under that fourth bullet point, which is an activity by a private party involving the issuance of an entitlement from a public agency. Next slide. So the first step with CEQA is to review a project for exemption, because a lot of, especially smaller projects, are exempt from additional review. And there are generally three kinds of exemptions, one of which is statutory exemptions, which is where the legislature has gone through and said, this kind of project is not subject to review under CEQA. Things like restriping of streets that don't increase the capacity of the street. The state legislature said, you don't have to do CEQA for that, it's fine. Categorical exemptions are adopted by the Secretary of the Resources Agency, and they're part of the CEQA guidelines. Those generally include, kind of, as the name says, they include categories of project types that the Secretary has deemed to not have a significant effect on the environment. Things like modifications to existing facilities, new construction of small structures, the parcel maps in an urbanized area that include less than or 4 or fewer parcels. Those things are considered to not have a significant effect. And there are certain exceptions to those rules, but by and large, the categories are what they are. Then ministerial projects, which I mentioned a couple of those, issuance of building permits, approval of final maps, those sorts of things. If the public agency doesn't get to exercise discretion as to whether to approve or deny the project, it's not subject to CEQA. So if we pass through this review for exemption and we determine that the project doesn't meet any of these categories or statutory examples, then we have to do what's called an initial study. That includes an environmental checklist that identifies and analyzes potential impacts of the project. This checklist has 20 environmental resource categories plus a final section that discusses certain findings of significance. So if all of these, the answers to these questions can't just be yes or no. They have to be based on substantial evidence that the project would not have an effect on, or significant effect on the environment. If the initial study doesn't identify any significant effects, or if it does, but it identifies mitigation or avoidance measures that can be applied that would reduce those effects to a less than significant level, then you can prepare what's called a negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration. The negative, you're declaring in the negative that it will have a significant effect, which is an awkward way of saying it, but it's California law. So next slide, please. So if the initial study identifies project impacts that cannot be successfully mitigated, so if even after mitigation there's still the potential for significant effect, then you have to prepare what's called an environmental impact report. The EIR identifies the same issues that a negative declaration does, but it also looks at project alternatives and generally requires that the lead agency select for approval the most environmentally responsible alternative that is feasible for the applicant to do and that meets the primary goals of the project. So yes, you could say if somebody wanted to build a 1,000-unit residential project that would have significant effects and you cut that in half to 500, yes, it would have fewer effects, but if that doesn't accomplish the same goals, then the city is not obligated to approve this cut in half project, essentially. And the distinction, well, one of the criteria for identifying alternatives is that they have to be practical alternatives. You can't simply say, here's this project, the alternative is to cut the project size in half or in quarter, obviously then throwing that alternative out. It has to be, you have to provide meaningful alternatives with meaningful analysis. Next slide. So CEQA does allow a lead agency to approve projects that will result in significant effects. If the city, for example, does an EIR for some kind of project and determines that yes, even with mitigation, there will still be significant and unavoidable impacts from the project, the city can approve it provided that it makes certain findings and that it adopts what's called a statement of overriding considerations. And the statement of overriding considerations is a document that says, yeah, we acknowledge that this will, for example, create a lot of air pollution, but it will also create 500 jobs. And we find that the creation of 500 jobs is more important than the negative impacts to air quality, that sort of thing. And again, hypothetical, just picked an impact and a benefit for comparison's sake. But that is built into CEQA. Which is how we end up with projects all over the state of California that clearly have negative effects to things like noise, traffic, air quality, and so forth, because the agencies that approved them made the determinations that the benefits of the project outweigh the negative effects. So there are public review periods that are set up depending on the level of CEQA review that is required. For projects that are exempt, there is no preliminary public review period. The lead agency essentially says at the time it's choosing to approve the project, we find this project exempt and we're approving the project. It can then file what's called a notice of exemption with the county clerk and with the state clearinghouse in Sacramento that starts a 35-day legal challenge period. So after that 35 days has elapsed, nobody can legally challenge the approval of the project on CEQA grounds. For negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration, there are a couple different levels of review. If it's a local review only, it can be a 20-day review, and that would be the city essentially just sending the document to local agencies or local entities that may have interest in the project, like the County of Fresno, like Consolidated Irrigation District, the Air District, the School District, and so forth. And that review period can be for 20 days. If the city is doing a project that will involve state agencies, like Caltrans, like anything that involves biological resources, and therefore the Department of Fish and CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, any state level agency, the city is required to circulate it for a minimum of 30 days. And we actually send the document to the state clearinghouse in Sacramento, and they route it out to all of the state agencies that need to comment on it. If the city receives comments during the negative declaration review process, we are required, and anybody who was here at the last council meeting, we did have a couple of comments that we received on a CEQA document. We're required to bring them to the decision-making body's attention and provide our assessment of whether that should change the analysis that's contained in the CEQA document, and therefore whether it could change their decision on the project. In the case of the commercial project last time, we did not feel that the comments that we got rose to that level. We got comments from the Air District and the County of Fresno and provided our assessment to the City Council that what we had prepared didn't change our analysis. We are not required to formally respond to the agencies that commented. If we're talking about an environmental impact report, the process is a little more, I was going to say convoluted, a little more protracted in that the review period is a minimum of 45 days. It does have to go to the state clearinghouse for dissemination to the state agencies as well. And any comments that we receive from a public agency, we have to formally respond to them in writing, breaking down each of the individual comments that they made in, say it's a comment letter. It's usually in a letter form. Sometimes it's an email, but And then the second component of the environmental impact report is called the final EIR. And part of that final EIR is the formal responses to comments. So we do have to, instead of with the neg deck where we just give a general assessment of comments received for this council's consideration, for the EIR we do have to break down every comment that bears a relationship to our environmental analysis and provide the council with the reasoning that we feel or don't feel that changes our analysis, could require circulation of the environmental impact report, any number of things. It's a much more, like I said, a little more in-depth process. Once the city council adopts a neg deck, mitigated neg deck, or certifies an environmental impact report, we're required to file what's called a notice of determination with the county clerk and then with the state clearinghouse. And that notice of determination initiates a 30-day statute of limitations for legal challenges to the project. Failing all of these filings that I've mentioned, the 35 days for an exemption or the 30 for the other types of documents, failing that, the statutory period is 180 days. So by default, CEQA is set up to try to allow some sort of certainty to development where it gives what, by its own admission, are very short legal challenge periods once projects are approved, subject to CEQA. So, next. We are getting towards the end. Thank you for bearing with me here. There are a number of procedural requirements that apply to the planning processes. Most of what we do requires noticed public hearings. The minimum are 10-day public hearing notices, and they have to be published in a newspaper of general circulation, posted at City Hall. We post them on the city's website. If it involves specific uses of real property, we also have to notify by U.S. mail the property owner and the owners of all properties within 300 feet of the exterior boundary of the project site. So you may get notices in the mail. They don't affect your property per se. We're required to let you know that we're doing a project near where you own property. So it gives you the opportunity to attend a hearing and so forth. Anything that is not approved or denied by the city council, like if it's at staff level or in the case of a place with the planning commission, by the planning commission, any aggrieved party has the right to appeal that ultimately to the city council. I went over most of there are several notices that are required to be filed as part of CEQA. A notice of preparation for an environmental impact report that gives a period of at least 30 days where anybody who just wants to comment on it before it's even written can tell the city what they think the EIR should contain. A notice of completion is filed when the document is routed for circulation. A notice of intent applies to the neg deck or mitigated neg deck, and essentially it's published in the newspaper and posted at City Hall and in other public locations, announcing the public review period for a mitigated neg deck or neg deck. Then the notice of determination is what we file at the end of the process. I talked about comments and responses. I could talk about the Brown Act, but that's probably more in Neil's purview. We essentially, as far as it relates to what I do, we do have to publish notices of hearings, make the materials available to the public at the same time they're made available to the decision-making body, and then obviously we have to have a quorum of officials, and in some cases a supermajority in order to enact certain regulations. I hope that's it. Yes.
Thank you, Jeff.
So,
any questions from the council? No?
Sorry for going on and on. I tried to be quick, but there's a lot of stuff there. So,
no, that's
yeah.
good. Thank you.
Any of you can always reach out if you have questions about any of this stuff or.
And any from the public? Can you approach the podium, please?
The question on to my name is Fernando Banuelos. I reside in 560 8th Street in Parlor. One of the questions was I thought was really interesting. How much information you got? That was unbelievable. I was like, wow, this guy's fantastic. What if you have you have a good-sized lot, and it's subdivided into 3 equal rectangle lots. Can a person put in a square in the lot, in the corner, so it's a different kind of shape into a lot?
Are you referring, oh, sorry. Are you still ending up with 3 lots or 4?
Still with, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Anytime you're doing anything and you're not a public agency, anytime you're doing anything that results in more lots than you started with, you have to go through either the parcel map process or the tentative and final map process. And I won't bore everybody else. You can, even if it seems like you have 4 or 3 and you're gonna end up with 4, and then you could come back next year and do another one to just create one, you can't do that. Once you get to a certain point of successively subdividing, you can no longer do parcel maps and you have to do the tentative and final map. But if the short version is if you have 3 lots and you want to end up with 4, you have to do a map. Yeah. And the maps by law have to be prepared by a California licensed land surveyor or by a civil engineer who is a pre-1982 civil engineer.
Another one. You know, if we're looking at the environmental impact, you know, I see around schools that there are a lot of diesels or big trucks that are actually parking around the schools, and sometimes they're idle there. So is that going to be a environmental impact with the schools, you know, as far as the air quality?
Pardon me. Okay, so if it's simply a matter of there's an existing school and people are parking or idling diesel trucks next to it, that's probably something that is going to be, that's not even regulated, as far as I know, by the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. That, if anything, would be regulated by the California Air Resources Board, who has the authority over mobile sources. If we're talking about a new project that would go in next to a school, and that new project would be likely to have trucks that idled, then what we would have to do as part of our initial study analysis would be to assess the emissions produced by the idling vehicles, and I will freely admit air quality analysis is not my forte. Some sort of a health risk analysis. Well, there's that part. The school would be what's called a sensitive receptor, which falls into the same category as residences, senior facilities, those sorts of things, where the people who are generally at that facility may be more susceptible to air quality impacts. So sensitive receptors, we would have to look at the proximity of this new proposed diesel idling situation to the sensitive receptors and provide that analysis in the CEQA document. But as far as stopping people from idling trucks next to a school now, that's not really part of the planning environmental process. That's more of an enforcement thing on the back end.
I hope that the city council members really learn about this, because we don't have no planning commission, we don't have no zoning commission, we don't have anything in Parlier. You know, so if I'm the owner of, or I want to buy a house on a new development, and I'm in the city council, I can choose what lot I want. The biggest one, provided, and then I will vote for that zoning. You know, so let's try to get rid of that. You know, and the other thing is that I don't know how many projects had been covered by CEQA here in Parlier. I haven't seen no projects in Parlier that haven't covered by CEQA. None of them since I've been here. No, it is true. I don't know how many projects they haven't covered, but I'm not going to argue with you. But since I've been here, most of the projects I requested that it should not be applied CEQA. Okay, so probably is one that you got involved, or I don't know. But that's one of the issues. But the thing that I'm trying to avoid is that if I'm at city council members, I'm gonna be able to choose what lot I'm going to buy and that. Because I'm gonna be voting on it, otherwise I will not vote on it. Okay, so it's a lot of stuff that I want you guys to think about it. Right now, I'm just guessing, because I see some of that accusations that you guys don't have against the prior city council members, against mayors, that they got the bigger lots, that they got this, that they got that. So let's try to avoid that from now on. Let's do the commissions. Let's do the Parks and Rec Commission. Let's do the planning commissions, so everybody will be involved and not only the city council. The
Thank
other
you.
thing that I
There-
see
Is it pertaining to the presentation? Because it has.
it is
Okay.
buffer zones. We don't have any buffer zones on the developments, new developments. So which it means is that if I'm buying my property by the orchard, I don't know what kind of pesticides I'm gonna be applied there because I don't have a buffer zone. And you guys can never apply that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on to,
Excuse me, did you have a comment to say after what this gentleman was talking about? Looked like you were gonna respond to something. Okay.
I was just,
Jeff, can you please
Could just-
respond to CEQA?
it's only CEQA. This other stuff has, it's not even, the commissioners, that's not part of his presentation. That we can have in, please, let's just move on.
Just real quick to CEQA. I mean, we got it.
You are the boss. I wanna remind you that.
Yes.
Neil,
so as far as CEQA goes, I mean, off the top of my head, I know that we just did 2 CEQA documents for the recharge project and for the Flores Basin project. As far as the larger development projects, we did standalone, like I mentioned, the Manning and Academy project that we went over last time. It goes back to 2021 because there was not a whole lot of larger development projects going on in 2022. 2021, we did initial studies and mitigated neg decks for the original Manning and Academy project. As a follow-up document for the other approved car wash and gas station that would have been next to Starbucks, and then for tract 6356, the Mendocino and South subdivision that I was talking about. There have been several projects that have been exempt, and so as part of the resolution approving those projects, the council makes a finding that it falls under the specific categorical exemption for these reasons. So, I mean, that's off the top of my head.
Thank you. That's all I want to know.
Okay.
so we can move on to the next item. And the next item is public comments. Anybody would like to address the, Celia Cano?
And I'm here speaking in regards to the municipal code, which requires the water service to be listed under the property owner. I recently came and did the change as you required, and I'm not the resident at 852 King Street. My dad is. He's a senior. I was told that his senior discount was going to be taken away, and I don't agree with that. So I'm hoping that you reconsider because it's going to affect not just my dad as a senior, but other seniors in the community. So I'm speaking on behalf of them.
Thank you. I think we were gonna look into that too.
Well, he used to be the owner, the dad, and that's why he had a senior discount. Somehow she's the owner now, I don't know, transfer or something. So the discount comes,
He's like the renter, right? It has to be in your.
Well, I
in your name?
mean, he doesn't per se rent. He lives there.
No, I know, but like he's considered like the renter, right?
I guess.
And it's in your name. It had to be transferred in your name
correct.
because now with that change that we did, it has to be in your name.
Correct.
So I thought we were doing that where if it's the landlord and they had the renter, they could be, both of them could be on the account. So that way he could still continue to get the discount
The tenant can be on the account
with her.
with the
Yeah.
landlord's permission.
Yes.
And I suspect the conveyance of the property to you was just because he's elderly.
Correct.
And it's going to you eventually, right?
Correct.
That's what my dad
And
did.
so he's not really even a tenant, he just.
Living there.
Yeah, living there. So we
Well,
we
in
can-
reality, it's his home, and I mean, like you said, it's just eventually it will go to, me and my brother, so it's listed under our names. But I
yes.
just wouldn't
So-
want
so
that
we
discount.
We can have it listed under his name with your permission.
Okay.
As long as you agree to be responsible for the charges for the sewer
And
and
I'm
water.
fine with that.
And that would trigger his senior
Discount.
discount.
Okay. So would I have to come back and fill out other paperwork?
I think you would go through Ellie, and she'll just set that up.
You would have to come in and fill out other paperwork, and it's basically just, giving us your consent
Okay.
to put it in his name and keeping you responsible ultimately
Right.
for the payment of the bill.
Okay. That, I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
Hi, my name is Sandra Alvarez. My suggestion is, I saw something online in regards to possibly doing something for the crosswalks for the schools. My suggestion is, I thought initially there's some schools that have the big lights, but I was thinking Reedley College, they have the tracks, and those tracks, the lights light up. And not only that, but it's brighter, so it gives more attention and it draws more attention. So that was my suggestion.
I think, Javier, you can address that too, because there's already a project that is in the works, and it has to do with the school. Of course, all the schools the principals have to be involved, the superintendent, to get ideas of what works for each school, because not all schools are gonna have the same kind of safety plan. But one of the things that Javier brought up was, and I did see it in Reedley, they have also where you have that median in the middle, where it's not as wide anymore. So you won't have that wide stretch for them to walk across, and it kind of gives them a place to stand where they can be, in the middle, and make sure the other side is clear before they get hit. So Javier, could you please go over that a little bit?
Yeah, so we recently, I think it was maybe 6 months ago, the school was talking for maybe over a year. We've been trying to figure out how to make our crosswalk safer. Just in this last summer, we installed rapid flashing beacons. So all the crosswalks have rapid flashing beacons around the schools, where you hit the button and it flashes. That was just this last summer, and we got lucky. Just on the 23rd, we were awarded the $6 million to install those. They're called in-road lights, and they're lights inside the crosswalk, so they actually light up in the road. Those are over $150,000 each crosswalk, so it's not something you can really just go out and buy. So the grant's really going to help us put that in. Yeah.
And one of the things that I like to mention is, as far as that too, even the Fresno Council of Governments, because we have the funds from Measure C that also provides for safe routes to school. And we had the discussion at our last meeting with all the mayors from all the cities of Fresno County. And what they're planning to do is get all the mayors together with all the superintendents throughout the Fresno County to work on a safety plan for all schools throughout the county. That's amazing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Speaking my name is Juan Cano. Speaking on crosswalks and safety lights and all this, in my neighborhood, I see a lot of kids crossing. I live across from Mexico. That traffic there's a lot. It's really, cars are zooming by, back and forth. There is no crosswalk for any of those kids that live in the Cahill Vanning homes that go into that new walkway that we built, or even adults who walk over there. City engineer, city council, if you guys could look into putting a crosswalk in that general area. This way our kids and just our general citizens have a safe way to cross. Yeah, when I walk my dogs, I cross, and we constantly have to watch out because cars are flying. Because they're coming in from the country on Zedeker, and they're speeding through from Manning across Zedeker as well, so I see that all the time. So maybe we could look into putting a crosswalk out there, have our city engineer or whoever else to go out there on Zedeker Avenue, just north of Zuma or between Zuma and Orozco. A crosswalk would be greatly appreciated out there.
So,
Thank you.
Sonia, on that one too, that's a very long stretch without anything, like we talked about in the houses over there. Yeah, maybe like a stop sign even too, just somewhere right there.
Okay.
That would be nice.
I think that with the stop sign, they always have to look at studies that they do, and that would be Javier again. Javier?
Yeah, so that's a good point. We've already looked at that since we recently added that Sequoia walkway, the trail in the alley behind Mexico. A lot of kids have been using that to go to school, and they do cross Zedeker there. It seems like it's been an issue for a long time, and we've been looking at it, putting in the crosswalk in there, but we have to do our due diligence because crosswalks with no stop signs are the most dangerous crosswalks there are. So you have to justify, you have to do engineering study, making sure that
Maybe we
you're going to save more lives.
stop sign.
Yeah.
See if it warrants a stop sign.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think because we're Parlier Avenue, Fresno goes into Parlier on that side to on East, going toward East Avenue. But in the mornings, there's the kids are coming from, the Devil's Colony, coming this way, crossing at that odd intersection, and that there's a canal right there. And I don't go that way anymore, but I would go use that daily, and there's kids crossing. I've had to stop in the middle of the street to let the kids walk across the street, and that's highly in the morning, and I can only imagine what's on the other side at the walkway, and especially after school.
Yeah.
Kids go home that way.
Well, I think they're already scheduling something. I know the superintendent messaged me, and I believe he said that, Chief, you were going to be attending that safety session that they were going to work on safe routes on the 21st of this month. So,
yeah, we actually have plans to collaborate and just brainstorm those ideas, and we're going to come up with. We have a really good relationship with the school district and the new superintendent. So I think together we can come up with some really good ideas and increase the safety for the kids and the pedestrian traffic in the community.
Thank you, Chief. Anybody else?
Fernando.
Oh, I think it was, yeah, okay.
Just to kind of add a little bit about I want to thank the mayor who brought up to have a moment of silence. I think that was great for Fernanda. And prayers go out to their family. Also for Lucy, who's been sick, and Pimentel and the family. So we pray for them too. Good evening, board members and people from the audience. My name is Fernando Banuelos. I reside in 560 8th Street in Parlier. I'm here in concern with the issue of Section 82041, and is as follows. Mr. Costanzo stated that the mayor has the power to appoint a person to the weed embankment. This is a false statement. The power to appoint means the following. Appointment and removal of power in the contents of administrative law refers to the authority of executive to appoint and remove officials in various branches, vested in authority to do so. The mayor does not have the power she only has to suggest whom to appoint. The city council as a whole has the power to vote to whom to appoint. And right now, I would look at Mr. Raul Villanueva. I think he's really good, also has a lot of great experience. Now, in this one is, if we look at the person has the power, there was no no mayor in the past years, and I talked to a couple of people who were there at the meeting 30 years ago, and I asked them, did Arcadio Oliveros, did he have the power to appoint the person from the weed embankment who's been there for 30 years, Joe Reyna, And they said no. In fact, they had about 2 or 3 people who they suggested to be part of the weed abatement. And that's how they got Joe Reyna. And on this one is, if we look at as far as the subdivision, and we're looking at compliances, and I do remember that the attorney said that there's modifications if we start to read further down from the ordinance section 82041. And I did some research on it. If we look at the second page on the research, it says, well, it doesn't say that, but it says, even though the City of Parlier Council may conclude to make any amendments, the City Council cannot make any modifications to any of the section 82041. There is no special circumstances at this point. So therefore is, as Mrs. Molina said last time, she said, this is the reason that we're here to vote, because we like to suggest other people to be part of the board. Mr. Cazanto also mentioned that the President of the United States had the power to appoint administration. This statement is misleading and not according to the Supreme Court.
Okay, your 3 minutes are up now. Thank you.
I didn't see the thing.
Thank you. It's only his 3 minutes that you can go up there and continue. That's how you can continue. So you can take from where he left. You can go up there. You can read what he has and go up there. Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the public? Okay. Alrighty, we can move on to the next item. I'm sorry?
Council member
Okay,
has something to announce. Go ahead.
I just wanted to let everybody know that I did talk to its chief, and I had talked to Sonia, and because of all the stray dogs that we have in the city, and all the concerns the citizens have been bringing up, not just to myself, but to a lot of the other council and chief and everybody else in town, right? But we came up with a meeting that chief is going to be doing next Wednesday, March the 8th, from 6 to 8 p.m. And it will be at the Parlier Police Department Training Room, 8770 South Mendocino Avenue. And it says, the Parlier Police Department is inviting the community to a public meeting where we will engage the community in a robust conversation about the city dog population. The meeting will be focused on addressing concerns from the public, evaluating department policies, and developing innovation solutions aimed at improving the quality of life for residents through the implementation and reasonable, humane strategies. We encourage our residents to come out and share their thoughts and ideas to create effective long-term solutions, working closely in partnership with the community, underlying the police department's philosophy. Anything can be accomplished through teamwork. And I'm really thankful for this, Chief. Thank you, and Sonia. I think this will help us. I feel that our community, by involving them in a lot of the issues that we have in our city, is going to be better for not just us, but for the community too. And I agree with Mr. Gomez about the planning commissions, about the Parks and Recreation commissions or committees. I think our community residents need to be involved. We need to be able to hear what you guys have to say. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. Not just for us, we're here for the community. And if you have a concern, you can voice your opinions and your concerns, and we should be able to listen to you. We might not agree with it, or we might say, hey, that's the best thing we heard, but you have that right to do it.
I think
And
Chief wanted
hopefully
to say
everybody can
something.
come.
I was just going to thank Councilmember Molina for actually reaching out to me and expressing how important this is to the community. And we knew all along that this was a challenge. We do have an overpopulation of dogs that are at large, stray dogs, as well as licensed dogs, and it is a big challenge. And she had some great ideas about getting funding for spade and neutering to help control the overpopulation of dogs, and having a community meeting. So I put out that public meeting, based on a lot of what she was suggesting. So she had some really good ideas, and I think it's overdue. We've been battling this problem for a while, but we do have strict policies and procedures that we have to follow. We have city ordinances that we have to adhere to, and I think part of this is going to be educating the community to let them know what our ability is in respect to handling the overpopulation of stray dogs, and what we can do and can't do, because I think there's a misconception about what we can do, and why can't you do this, why can't you do that? Well, we have to go through several steps before we can do this, because our policy dictates it, and our ordinance, our laws, says that we can and cannot do things. So we're prohibited from doing some things, but altogether, I think if we all come together as a community and share ideas, who knows, we could really come together and get control of this really quick. But we look forward to that meeting, and if anybody could show up, it's at the police department next Wednesday from 6 to 8. We encourage everybody to come out and share their ideas. We're glad to have them.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Janie.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Chief, for doing that, and also Janie. This is one of the biggest things that I've wanted coming in, is making committees for different stuff that we have. This was part of the, 2.04, but that one's a commission, right? So hopefully we can start more committees. And yes, ultimately we are here to work for you guys. You guys are the taxpayers, and you guys are the ones who elected us in. So having your guys' input is very big for me, and that's my opinion. So thank you guys again, and thank you, Janie and Chief.
I also would like to thank you guys for giving us Janie, for putting that input for us, for the community that need it. Thank you.
Anybody else from the public like to approach the podium? No? Okay, let's move on to the next item, consent calendar. Sure.
Going back to the mosquito abatement, I did speak to Mr. Joe Reyna. He did talk about it, and he did mention to me that it was very, very important for us as a community to have somebody representing us on that trustee share. So we need to come together as council to find somebody, because I know there's a lot of very knowledgeable people in Parlier. And I know, Mayor, you're the one that recommends. Maybe
Appoints.
we can appoint. Well,
Yeah.
suggest.
Appoint.
Okay.
Can you clarify that again?
Well, yeah, there we go again now. It's okay. But anyway, I just want to say it out there that we do need somebody on that committee, on that trustee share.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as we can. Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Let me just, Neil, he's.
I think after my suggestion. My suggestion is going to be to that the city council members to come with names. See, the mayor doesn't want to do the appointment. You guys can vote for whoever you want, and ask Sonia to do the letter, and Sonia can do the appointment, on your behalf, because she's the boss.
Okay. Go ahead, Neil. Thank you.
Mayor, members of the council, I sent to you this afternoon, so you probably haven't seen it.
I have it. Should I print it for the council?
If you wish, I can tell you what's there. I was attempting to address the same comment from Council Member Molina that was made to me directly earlier in the week. The way this works is that under Government Code Section 40506, an elected mayor is responsible for making the appointment to all committees, commissions, and boards, all of them. And that language applies specifically to a regional board, not just the internal city boards, committees, or commissions like a planning commission, for example. The mosquito abatement district is a regional public entity and the board of trustees is their governing body. So the way this works under that statute is precisely the way it works for a president that is appointing a judge who has to go to the Senate to get the advice and consent of the Senate. And you've actually seen it in action because she made a nomination of somebody that is subject to your approval or disapproval. So the council as a body has a right to either approve or disapprove of the person that is, the statute uses the word appointed, but it's actually more in common parlance, it's more akin to a nomination that is subject to your approval or disapproval. That is the way it works for literally every board, committee, or commission that you have the ability to appoint to. There are some exceptions to that. And typically, there are actually 3 exceptions to that. If there is, it is specifically provided otherwise by statute. That's the first exception. And in the case of, excuse me, in the case of a mosquito abatement district, it is not specifically provided otherwise by statute. And in the memorandum I sent to you, I included a decision by the Attorney General's office, which deals with an appointment to a harbor district that uses precisely the same language as the language in the law relating to mosquito abatement districts. And they have opined that that language means the mayor has the ability to make the nomination and you folks have the ability to approve or disapprove. The second exception would be where there is a ordinance that is adopted by the voters. The ordinance adopted by the voters would override that if it specifically provides otherwise. And we have an example of that in our code where we have codified the voter-approved Measure Q, which is our special parcel tax. That ordinance states explicitly that the person who has the power of appointment is the city manager. And the city manager makes those appointments subject to your approval or disapproval. Same way as it works with the mayor.
Yeah, and that's only Measure Q, right?
Measure Q.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only exception I could find in your ordinance. I don't remember
because it went to the voters.
If we had such a committee on Measure S, which is our sales tax.
No.
I don't think that we did.
No. No, we didn't put that.
But, you know, if we did that, that would spell out who gets the power of appointment, those sorts of things. Third exception would be anything that is required by a contract. And that would include a grant agreement. Every time the city gets a grant, they have a grant agreement, and that grant agreement sometimes requires you to get public input and sometimes requires you to go out and find certain types of people, business people, school people, various types of citizens in your city, and those people are appointed to a committee that oversees either the development of what you're going to spend this money on, and you've got an example of that on your agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Because that particular grant that we're talking about requires that you have and Sonia can tell you the precise requirements there, but those are people that are appointed again by the city manager, subject to your approval, because they come within the grant agreement. It is specifically required by the grant that you have those specific people there, and it speaks in terms of the city, and the signatory to the grant agreement is Sonia, and Sonia is in charge of that grant administration, so that falls on her as well. So those are the three exceptions. I don't know what Mr. Banuelos provided you in writing, but the situation here is governed by statute,
Give it to me.
not an ordinance or anything else. Is this a code section out of some code? Do you know if this is the government code?
Same code that you read last week, 2 weeks ago.
What's the section now? 82041. And it certainly looks like a statute. Is the definition of local government entity?
Agency.
Agency.
Yeah, the whole 820 component of government code is the Political Reform Act and its definitions.
Okay.
So it may be from a different code.
I don't think does it have definitions of local elected official, chief administrative officer, and those sorts of things in there too, in subsequent subdivisions? I think that's what we're referring to. This is, I think, and I can verify this when I get back to the office, but I think this is part of the Political Reform Act that is enforced by FPPC. And these definitions in here are basically definitions that tell you what a local governmental official is that is subject to the requirements of the Political Reform Act, which typically, by and large, prohibit financial interest in matters that are coming before the council, and will operate to disqualify you. What the statute I'm referring to is 40506 of the Government Code, and that is the statute that is applicable to the powers of an elected mayor. And we have probably 3 examples here in the county, maybe 4. I have 4. Huron, Sanger, Selma, and Parlier are all cities that have an elected mayor. City of Fresno does too, obviously, but they're a charter city and they're not a general law city like us. But if you're a general law city and you have an elected mayor, the government code will prescribe the powers of that elected mayor. So that's what I'm referring to when I say the mayor has the power to appoint, but that power to appoint is subject to their approval or disapproval. And there is no case law interpreting this provision. The only interpretation of that provision out there is provided by opinions of the Attorney General's office, which is something I provided to them this afternoon, along with the memorandum that I sent to them, because Councilmember Molina and I think Mr. Councilmember Garza were raising the same question with me earlier this week, and I wanted to explain it to them in more detail and actually show them my work, so to speak, so that they can see, where I'm coming from, because I understand it's a difficult concept to understand when you've got all these other cities around you that are in 5 districts and do not have an elected mayor. Their mayors are appointed, and so that appointed mayor does not have any of the powers of an elected mayor. There's just that difference, and that difference is determined ultimately by the voters. In our case, it was determined by the voters back in 1921, because in order to have an elected mayor, you need to have a vote of the people that says we're going to have a city council of 5 people, we're going to have a city manager, city council form of government, we're going to have 4 districts with each of the 4 members elected by district, and then we're going to have an elected mayor at large. So way back in 100 years ago, that's what they voted on, and that's what they approved, and that section I cited to you, 40506, is still has been in existence since California was formed. It's been amended a couple of times, but if you go to the actual code book, you can see that thing was adopted in the 1870s, 1880s. So it's always been there.
Now, I think you talked about districts right now.
Mm-hmm.
That was, you did say that, am I correct?
Yeah.
I think this, if you want to have it on the agenda, Neil, because this is not even on the agenda, and now we're going back, and he responded to him, so I think we need to, we already passed the public comments, so we just need
It's
to
not gonna take
move
too long.
on already,
About 30
because
seconds,
this
30
is,
seconds. Remember,
we can't continue. It's not an item that's on the agenda, and the Brown Act states that you have to have that item on the agenda in order for you to continue to have that discussion.
unless a person brings it out, which you did.
No, it's,
Yes.
there's no exception on the Brown Act, so
I was on
I
board
suggest
before.
you go refresh yourself
Yeah, I was
on the
on board
Brown
before.
Act.
And well, if you have a question, sir, you're free to ask me after the meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, after the meeting,
m-
please.
Whatever
We
you
gotta
like.
conduct this meeting. We're not gonna stay on this topic. If you want us to put it on the agenda for further discussion, we can. But right now, it's not on the agenda.
Okay, Mr.
So we
Neal, then I
need
won't
to
answer that
move
question.
on.
Appreciate that.
So
Thank you.
next, we move on to the consent calendar. Does anybody in the council wanna pull an item from the consent calendar, please?
I want to pull number 2.
Okay, any other item? No? Hearing none. Is there any other item from the consent calendar that anybody wants to discuss?
On that consent, I just wanna make sure that, on item, what happened is that sometimes you guys are approving the items by bunch. And so you see,
That's why we have to pull it for discussion. So which one would you like to pull?
you see what it says under the consent calendar, okay?
Are you gonna want to pull an
That I
item?
consider routine and will be enacted on one motion. And last time, in the last meeting, you guys approved 2 things, item 3 and item 4, that were not regular.
You pull items for
I
discussion.
want to pull the number 3 and number 4.
Okay, number 4?
Yes.
There's no number 4. There's only number 3.
On the minutes.
Oh, she already pulled number 2 for the minutes.
That's what I'm saying. I'm pulling those 2
Okay.
issues for that.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve item number 1? Motion from Diego and second from Kathy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5 yes. Okay. Now, let's move on to item 2. Sabrina?
Number 2, on the minutes, there's 2 typos, small typos. I'll let you know what they are. I don't.
And we can approve it with those changes.
I also wanted to make sure that the minutes read, on the special meeting minutes, they say staff member to sign instead of, saying the city manager, assistant city manager, and then, the mayor and mayor pro tem.
Yeah, they should list,
Staff members instead of, so it could have been anybody for
Be
staff.
specific, yeah.
yes.
So the appropriate motion would be to approve as amended.
Yes.
Yeah.
I got a question also on the minutes, because those 2 things are in the minutes, the ones that I'm referring to. And also, I believe there is a typo on.
Yeah, she
on,
just mentioned the typo.
Sabrina Rodriguez, that she was elected. She was appointed, not elected. So I just want to make sure.
Oh, yeah.
You were appointed, oh, yeah. Oh, on that. Okay.
On the same minutes, we did approve waiving all fees for the Spanish congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses in Parlier. I don't know if they're from Parlier, that's 1. And 2,
The church? The Jehovah Witness Church?
that's part of the minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was approved as the routine
The consent.
matter.
Consent.
And
calendar.
we did had presenters that were here, and I think you know that. And you did not allow those presenters to speak. What was the reason? So item 4, the same thing, waivers to the California Farm Works Foundation. I don't know what they do, where they're coming from, and they were ready to do a presentation, and you guys approve it without hearing the presenters. So I just want to get to those, because if you're going to be giving approval, then I'm going to say Humberto Gomez Church wants to use that the place free of charge and everything.
If they're providing services. Sonia, can you kind of go over that a little bit? I think
So
they went
please,
through, went through Sonia, so Sonia can
Actually, they went through Eva.
Oh,
do you
Eva,
wanna
could you explain
can
it?
you explain, please?
Our coordinators are the ones that
What
deal
I'm
with that.
saying is that it was a wrong approval from you guys also too,
Okay.
because it was not a regular and routine matter.
Okay,
You were
Go ahead.
approving something that should not have been approved.
okay. Go ahead, Eva, thank you.
Okay, when the organizations come and request that, we do verify that they are an organization from, they're a nonprofit organization, so we do verify that they are current. They provide all the information. And it's brought, brought to the board, for those fees to be waived.
They were not allowed to make their own presentation.
But he's saying that they were here and they weren't allowed to present.
I think,
I don't think the council knew that they were here.
Yeah.
So we didn't know that they were here.
When they want to make a presentation, they need to go through the staff to let us know that they're going to present. But, yes, but not all the time. May I speak? Sure. Okay. So what sometimes they do is they'll be on the agenda and they ask them if they want to present or not. Not all of them come and present, just because you have the circus on here and they're not presenting. They're not presenting. Yes, but how do I know who they are? So our staff need to notify us, Sonia, and especially Sonia, because she sits up here, may I speak? I'm still trying to explain here. If it has to be with her to let us know that they're here present, that they want to say something. If we are not aware of it, there's no way of me knowing it. So not everybody that's on the agenda is here to speak. So the circus is on here and they're not here, but they put their item on the agenda for approval. So it all depends on the organization if they want to come and speak on behalf of their event. So thank you, Eva, and we can move forward on that. Thank you. So, okay. Well, it's our decision up here, so thank you. Any other item?
I motion to approve number 2 with the modifications to the minutes.
I second.
Second by Diego. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5 yes. Was that yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to approve the circus with which one? The item number 3? No, we haven't done the 3. No.
She did them separately.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because somebody pulled this one.
She pulled 2.
Didn't you want to pull 3?
No, nobody said.
Or it was you that wanted to talk about item number 3?
Number 3. Yeah.
Okay.
You're approving the minutes on that.
No, item 3. Minutes, the minutes is item number 2. I'm talking about item 3.
Yeah, that's, well, here it says number 3 and number 4, so that's what I have.
Okay, so it's about the circus.
My point is that you should allow the presenters to make the presentation. I understand that you already explained 3 times that you don't knew that. I think you knew that.
I don't
the
force
other
people
issue,
to come
wait a
here.
minute. The other issue is that I'm not, I love the Jehovah's Witness. I admire them because I used to do what they do every Saturday and Sunday, which is organized. But my point is that I'm not feel that good to be allowing a church to be using our facilities without no cost. Okay? So unless you want to allow all the churches to use the facilities
They were
at no
providing
cost.
what was it that, Eva, can you explain this again, please? What was the service they were providing? I'm sorry. Can you,
Annual.
just like the Catholic Church does their annual thing here too, we
I
allow them.
understand.
It's for the community.
I understand,
for
but
the
what I'm saying
community,
is, and that was going to be my question, we establish a precedent, and then you're going to apply the precedent. That's going to be my legal questions to Neil too. There is a precedent on what we already closed, that you never has to appoint.
What are we, okay, I don't know what you're talking
I
about.
know.
You're off
You
topic
already
again.
finished that, but you establishing precedents,
It's already
Mayor,
established.
and then when we try to apply those
Proving it for
precedents, then you're gonna
I
say
know.
no.
Yeah, it's like the Catholic Church. They have their event here and we just continue. It's just been something that has been done for years. So, and it's for the community. So if the community wants this, we're not gonna go against our community because you have a problem having the church here providing services for our community. Well, you said that it should be denied.
That you bypass that agenda.
Okay, I don't understand. Anyway, so, yes. No, this is what we're talking about right now. No, yeah, sorry, Dorothy, I know.
She did them separately.
I pulled it separately because he wanted to talk about item 3. So it was pulled. Okay, so now, do I have a motion to approve item number 3?
A motion to
Motion
approve.
by Diego, do I have a second? Second, Sabrina, all those in favor? Motion, 5 yes.
Oh,
I'm, oh, I didn't hear. 4 and 1 absent. Okay, can you put that on there? 4 and 1 absent. Stepped out.
okay. Next, item number 4, consideration and necessary action on the adoption of Resolution 2023-09, authorizing the formation of an advisory committee for the Parlier Active Transportation Study Tactical Urbanism and Grant. This is for the transportation planning grant. And so we do have to form a committee, and we're just asking the council to approve the authorization of the committee, the formation of this committee.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
beginning of the process. Of
Once again, thank you for forming a committee on this. I know it was needed by the grant, but I like I said, I'm all for committees and
Yeah, we
getting
do
the
want to
people
get the
involved.
community involved
Yeah, so-
and
Yeah,
have them
it's one of the
involved in this
requirements.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, appreciate it.
yeah. Well, you have to do this. Yeah. It's the state. So I thank the state for putting these requirements in there to get the community involved. So that's a good thing. Anybody from the public have any questions about the grant? Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't have a question, but I really do thank you too for doing, I know this one has to be because of the grant, but that's why we're pushing to have committees of our
Okay.
citizens in all the different areas of our city.
Okay.
This grant is actually different than most of the other transportation planning grants. It'll be fun. Javier, can you tell a little bit about it?
Yeah, so like when we were designing downtown, we brought it to council and we presented it multiple times. People had, comments about the lanes being shorter, but and then we're starting to see that people are slowing down in downtown. So I wanted to, when we were getting together, we were trying to brainstorm how do we apply different tactics at different intersections, different crosswalks, and see if they work, something temporarily. Maybe we set up planters in the middle of the road with beautiful flowers, and maybe that gets people to slow down when you go into crosswalks. So this grant is going to allow us to meet with a committee, look at each intersection, look at a crosswalk, and say, hey, what if we do, we create like an artist, or we bring some chalk and we draw some across our crosswalk and create beautiful art. Maybe that makes people slow down. We take a look at it, maybe measure traffic speed and see what kind of effects that had. And what that does is as we develop what's safer, we develop like a list of projects, and we can now start funding those projects with grants based off of all the footwork we do with this committee. So it'll fund planters, it'll fund temporary construction of crosswalks. It's not a lot of money, but it's mostly based for selecting those projects.
It's like pilot
studies, essentially.
studies. So it'll fund some construction.
Mhm.
Just try it out.
How will you get your committee members? How are you going to put it out there?
So we do need to have someone from the school. So we've already spoken to the superintendent and Renee. We do need someone from business and from the city. And also, we'd like to have a council member.
So it's not community, like people from.
Well, no, we do
involvement?
have community. We do want,
But
we're
that's
also
what I'm saying.
reaching
How
out.
are you going to let them know that this committee is going to be meeting if they want to be on it? How are you going to promote to be involved in the committee?
Social media.
Okay.
I think maybe do more than just social media, because not everybody has social media.
Yeah,
And-
I
can
could
put it in the
I could put it in the water bill.
Yeah, that would be good.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, so I think, did you have a question, sir? No. Okay. Okay.
Based on what Sonia was talking about and what Council Rodriguez was talking about, it says an advisory committee for the Parlier Active Committee, that's the one, for the Parlier Active Transportation Study, Tactical Urbanism. So I don't know what you guys mean on that, I mean, so, I know that you explained already, but for the committee, you're not gonna have anybody from the community
No.
so far.
No,
Yeah.
we are. We are. No, no.
She just
we-
explained that she's gonna send
this-
it to the, in
I'm
the,
going to send it out.
to, and also social media.
No, I'm just,
No,
no,
that's
no,
what
no.
she's gonna-
I just
she
said,
doesn't ha-
That's why I asked,
We're-
how is she going to
Humberto,
promote community
and
members?
you're getting ahead of yourself. We are barely, we're barely approving this today. So once it gets approved, then
Then I
she's gonna
send it
move
out.
forward and send the information out to the people. That's why she doesn't have a list of community members. She does know that she's gonna work with the school because she already contacted them.
To make sure that they were
That they would be
involved.
involved, but we have to approve this first. Then once it gets approved, then it goes out to the community so that we can see if people want to, get involved and participate in that. So. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I don't create this, so you gotta go again to go to Sonia if there's a problem the way it's written. So, any other questions from the public in regards to this grant? So do I have a motion to approve? Yeah. That committee for the grant, yeah. Oh, no, resolution number 2023-09 authorize, is that the one for the authorizing?
Yes.
Okay, for the committee, yeah, Parlier Active Committee.
I second.
I motion to approve.
Second.
Diego. And then Kathy. You're confusing me already, Mr. Humberto.
So the grant is called we called the name of the project Parlier Active Community. It's an advisory committee for our Parlier Active Community, and the grant is called Parlier Active Transportation Study. I know.
Okay, I think, all in favor? I didn't.
Aye.
Oh, 5. Motion carries 5 yes. I know. Okay.
Lot of words.
Now we move on to public comments for closed session. Neil?
On your closed session agenda, do you have one item of public employment for all positions? You have one conference with the labor negotiator, which in this case is our city manager, and the negotiation is relating to the Parlier Police Officers Association.
Okay, thank you. Anybody from the community would like to address the council on closed session items? No? Okay, then we will, that's for them. When we come back, you can mention it. Because we have that, we are going off the top, look, this is why we have an agenda.
I just wanted to say one thing.
But look, you have that part, unless you didn't put it, you have that part.
All I wanted to make clear was that I know that you appoint mayor, and I don't have a problem with it.
It's
I
fine.
just feel that you need to pick somebody.
I'm gonna pick, I'll
Yes,
look,
yes.
but you might not like the people that I pick, but it's okay.
You
That's, so we need to go into closed session, and then once we're done with that, we'll bring you guys back, so, thank you guys.
Michelle, so that bingo, I heard bingo and it got my attention.
Yes, they're sponsoring us. They contacted me. This is in Kingsford.
Is that for their humane dog, for their dogs too? To raise money?
They're helping Parlier dogs.
Oh.
They're doing it for us.
They're the ones that gave you the van, that group?
No. This
That-
is a whole different.
Oh, it's a whole different one?
Different ballgame. This is a business
Okay.
that,
And you said Sprout, is it the street Sprout?
it's a restaurant.
In Kingsford? By where?
It's in town.
It's in town? Okay, I'll check, I think I might check it out. I said bingo, you know me. Okay, chief, okay, all right. Who's that girl that sits right there? Who's that girl that sits right there?
Sandra?
Oh, the Sandra. Where's she? Yeah.
And it is your sister Joanne.
No, I don't let her out.
And Mary Pineda, I mean, Mary Cepeda. Okay. They're buying.
Better not make fun of me, because I'm gonna come in my baseball cap right
They're
now.
buying stuff, and then she goes,
She
hey,
goes, I'm
Joanne.
just gonna look at her and laugh.
You are Joanne, hon, because I had talked to her before. And I had
They actually are pretty good. I ain't gonna lie about that.
Well, hopefully I'll make it if I don't have nothing that day. I'd love to go see it. Yeah, yeah.